Good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's press conference on the receipt of the third independent review of the National Defense Act. Today we are joined by the Honorable Harjit Sajjan, Minister of National Defense, the Honorable David Lametti, Minister of Justice and Attorney General, Anita Vandenbeld, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defense, Lieutenant General Wayne Eyre, Acting Chief of the Defense Staff, Jody Thomas, Deputy Minister of National Defense, and Rear Admiral Geneviève Bernatchez, Judge Advocate General of the Canadian Armed Forces. Bonjour. Merci d'avoir rejoint cette conférence de presse sur la réception du troisième examen indépendant de la loi sur la défense nationale. Aujourd'hui, nous avons avec nous l'honorable Harjit Sajjan, ministre de la Défense nationale, l'honorable David Lametti, ministre de la Justice et procureur général, Anita Vandenbeld, secrétaire parlementaire du ministre de la Défense nationale, le lieutenant-général Wayne Eyre, chef d'état-major de la Défense par intérim, Jody Thomas, sous-ministre de la Défense nationale, et la contre-amiral Geneviève Bernatchez, juge-avocat général des Forces armées canadiennes. We will begin with remarks from Minister Sajjan and Parliamentary Secretary Vandenbeld, and then proceed with a question period. Minister Sajjan, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. On behalf of the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces and all Canadians, I want to thank the Honourable Maurice J. Fish, former Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, for completing the third independent review of the National Defense Act. When I asked Justice Fish in November 2020 to begin this independent review, he was tasked with analyzing the military justice system, including its structure. We knew that it needed to be updated. We knew that the system could be updated more responsive to the needs of the Canadian Armed Forces and more reflective of the civilian justice system. It is why I asked Justice Fish to provide a deep and far-reaching examination of the military justice system, including the military police. This is the most comprehensive independent review of the military justice system since the 1990s, and Justice Fish's recommendations provide one of the largest overhauls of the National Defense Act and Canadian military justice system in recent memory. And the defense team welcomes Justice Fish's findings. And that is why I have accepted the 107 recommendations in principle. I have directed the review of all the recommendations we received, and we will implement them as quickly and efficiently as we can. In the short term, the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defense will implement 36 of the recommendations. And while some of the recommendations will require greater consultation and analysis, I, the Department of National Defense, and the Canadian Armed Forces are committed to working with Minister Lametti and the Department of Justice to see how we can move forward to undertake the largest changes to the military justice system in a generation. We will do this in consultation with Justice Arbour, Justice Fish, experts, stakeholders, and most importantly, the survivors. I also commit to establishing a thorough and detailed implementation plan on recommendations that need further review, substantial resources, or significant legislative and regulatory changes. We will share this plan with the Standing Committee on National Defense this fall, along with an update on the work already done on Justice Fish's recommendations to date. And going forward, we will provide a twice-yearly report on our progress to the Standing Committee on National Defense to provide greater transparency. This report comes at a critical time. For the past few months, we've heard far too many heartbreaking experiences of Canadian Armed Forces members and Department of National Defense who have been impacted by hateful, hurtful, and harmful behaviors in our ranks. Too many accounts of appalling abuses of power. And we know that more work needs to be done so that we can have meaningful and lasting cultural change. We know we must do better, and we will do better. Justice Fish's recommendations will be essential to our ongoing work to strengthen the military justice system. We want to ensure our people have a voice when interacting with the military justice system, that they have confidence and trust in the process, and that they are treated fairly and respectfully at all times. We are determined to build trust in the system, support and protect our people, and create a safer, inclusive environment where they can contribute and thrive to the fullest. And we are already starting to implement recommendations that can be done in the short term. For example, recommendation number 72 speaks to the implementing a program that provides free independent legal advice to victims of sexual misconduct. This was funded in Budget 2021, and work has already started. We understand that to achieve the deep and lasting change we must go beyond just the military justice system and examine all the elements of our organization and culture. We need whole-scale change that is focused on building a defense team that feels safe and supported when they come to work. That's why we've asked Justice Louise Arbour to conduct a new comprehensive external review that will complement Justice Fish's work and look deeply at the culture of the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defense. She will expand upon this and previous reviews and recommendations and help guide us as we implement these recommendations and institute lasting reforms. Taking a broader look at how and why sexual misconduct continues to persist in our military and what we can do to prevent it. Justice Arbour will examine our policies, procedures, and practices in areas like incident reporting, military justice, training, and leadership selection. I've spoken with Justice Arbour. She would take into consideration many of the recommendations provided by Justice Fish and provide her own recommendations on how we can better support those who serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. She'll also offer both interim and final recommendations to bring about positive change, including an independent and external reporting system for those who have experienced sexual misconduct. We look forward to receiving her recommendations so we can implement them so that we continue to make the needed and lasting changes. The new Chief Professional Conduct and Culture, Lieutenant General Carrion, and her team will help us unify and deepen our efforts and initiatives to strengthen accountability and drive cultural transformation across the defense team. Part of that transformation is focused on implementing Bill C-77 provisions to modernize the National Defense Act, including the new Declaration of Victims' Rights. This work will be informed by Justice Fish's report. We know that we have a lot of work to do to create a culture of dignity and respect for every member of the defense team, and we are committed to doing this work. We must listen and learn from our people, past and present, to bring about culture change and eliminate sexual harassment, sexual assault, and abuse of power from our institution. We must remain transparent and accountable to them, to Parliament, and most of all to Canadians. Justice Fish's report offers clear and constructive recommendations to ensure that our military justice system remains aligned with the civilian system and better support our Canadian Armed Forces members. I want to thank him once again for his insights. And I will commit to him, to the Canadian Armed Forces members, the Department of National Defense employees, and all Canadians that we will pursue these goals to bring about the culture change that is needed in our institution. We will make sure that every member of the defense team feels safe, valued, and supported by their colleagues and leaders. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Bonjour. Comme le ministre Sajjan l'a souligné, le rapport de juge Fish arrive à un moment charnier pour les Forces armées canadiennes et le ministère de la Défense nationale. L'inclusion, le respect et la dignité pour tout compte parmi les principes que défend l'équipe de la Défense. Ce sont là les valeurs qu'elle s'engage à protéger et à promouvoir partout dans le monde. Mais trop souvent, le vécu des membres de l'équipe de la Défense ne correspond pas à ces valeurs. Les récentes allégations ont miné la confiance qu'ont les membres de l'équipe les uns envers les autres, ainsi que celle qu'ont les Canadiens envers leurs forces armées. Il ne saurait y avoir de tolérance pour le sexisme, le racisme, la misogynie ou toute autre forme de croyance ou conduite haineuse chez les membres de l'équipe de la Défense. C'est pourquoi nous nous efforçons de multiples manières d'établir les conditions requises pour un changement de culture en profondeur, notamment en lançant un nouvel examen externe, indépendant et complet sous la direction de la juge Louise Arbour, en nommant la lieutenant générale Carignan au poste de chef conduite professionnelle et culture afin de favoriser le processus de transformation culturelle, et en continuant de mettre en œuvre les dispositions du projet de loi C-77 visant à moderniser la loi sur la défense nationale, y compris la nouvelle Déclaration des droits des victimes. Ces efforts s'ajoutent aux importantes mesures que nous avons déjà prises pour donner suite aux recommandations formulées dans le rapport de 2015 de la juge Deschamps, promouvoir la diversité et l'inclusion en tant que valeur institutionnelle fondamentale, intégrer l'analyse comparative entre les sexes plus à tous les programmes politiques et services, fournir une gamme complète de services de soutien aux membres des forces armées canadiennes affectés, notamment par l'intermédiaire de centres d'intervention sur l'inconduite sexuelle, et simplifier le processus de dépôt de grief. Il s'agit là de progrès, mais nous savons que nous devons continuer d'aller de l'avant. L'examen de juge Fish a été lancé indépendamment des problèmes d'inconduite sexuelle avec lesquels nos forces armées sont aux prises. La loi sur la défense nationale exige la tenue régulière d'examens indépendants des dispositions qu'elle contient. Toutefois, ces conclusions vont alimenter nos efforts visant à régler ces problèmes. Elles nous aideront à cibler et à amplifier les importants travaux que nous menons pour bâtir un milieu de travail plus inclusif et une culture de dignité et de respect. Dans le cadre de l'examen, le juge Fish avait pour tâche d'examiner les dispositions de la loi sur la défense nationale et leur application. Son mandat couvrait ainsi le système de justice militaire, incluant le code de discipline militaire, la police militaire et la supervision de la police, de même que les griefs militaires et l'examen externe des griefs. L'examen et les recommandations qui en découlent visent à s'assurer que les politiques, processus et pratiques connexes demeurent pertinentes et responsables. Le juge Fish a pu se baser sur l'information la plus complète et tirer les conclusions les plus pertinentes en ayant accès au personnel approprié. Chez les membres des Forces armées canadiennes et les employés du ministère de la Défense nationale, chez les membres et le personnel du comité externe d'examen des griefs militaires, au sein de la commission d'examen des plaintes concernant la police militaire et au sein du bureau de l'Ombudsman du ministère de la Défense nationale et des Forces armées canadiennes. Au terme de cet examen robuste et rigoureux, le juge Fish a présenté 107 recommandations, dont la plupart portent sur le système de justice militaire. Nous acceptons ces recommandations en principe et nous avons déjà entamé le travail nécessaire pour pleinement réaliser l'intention du rapport du juge Fish. À court terme, nous mettrons en œuvre 36 recommandations auxquelles nous pouvons donner suite rapidement et efficacement. Comme l'a précisé le ministre, la recommandation numéro 72 porte sur l'établissement d'un programme fournissant des conseils juridiques indépendants et gratuits aux victimes d'inconduite sexuelle. Le budget de 2021 prévoyait du financement pour une telle mesure et le travail est déjà commencé. D'autres recommandations vont nécessiter des analyses ou des ressources supplémentaires ou encore des modifications législatives ou réglementaires pour garantir que nous les appliquerons de manière adéquate et efficace. Comme le ministre l'a annoncé, nous allons présenter notre plan de mise en œuvre de ces recommandations au Comité permanent de la Défense nationale cet automne et ferons le point de nos progrès 2 fois par année. Les examens indépendants menés régulièrement nous aident à garantir que notre système de justice militaire demeure pertinent, moderne et conforme aux valeurs canadiennes. Nous sommes donc vraiment reconnaissants au juge Fish du travail qu'il a accompli dans le cadre de son rapport. Son point de vue et ses conseils sont précieux en cette période de transformation de l'histoire des Forces armées canadiennes et le ministère de la Défense nationale. Ces recommandations vont aussi guider nos efforts pour garantir que l'équipe de la Défense ressorte plus forte de la crise actuelle et devienne une meilleure institution plus efficace qui reflète la population canadienne et les valeurs que nous chérissons tous. Merci.
Merci. Thank you. We will now move into a question and answer period. Journalists will be given the opportunity to ask one question and one follow-up. Please indicate who your question is for. Nous allons maintenant passer à la période des questions. Les journalistes auront la possibilité de poser une question et une question de suivi. S'il vous plaît, indiquez à qui s'adresse votre question. We will now go to the first question. Operator, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. Our first question, notre première question, is from Lee Bertium with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Yes, this message is for Minister Sajjan, or this question is from Minister Sajjan. You said that you have recommended you have accepted, the recommendations in principle. Some have noted that that was exactly the same language that was used by the previous government and the military in response to the Deschamps report, and which has raised concerns that basically these recommendations are not going to be implemented. So, what can you say to those who see this talk about in principle and are fearful that this will actually not lead to the change that has been called for?
Lee, first of all, thank you very much for the question. And some of our members who are hearing this do have the right to be the right to ask this question. But one thing I can assure all our members, the reason this is different, when we form a government and put our defense policy together, we put an emphasis on looking after our people. And that's why in chapter number 1 of our defense policy, we made that an absolute focus. So when it comes to any issues when looking after our people, whether it's misconduct, sexual misconduct, this is something that we take absolutely seriously. Now, in hindsight, obviously we could have and should have done a lot more. But when we learn of anything that comes forward, we want to be able to take that action. And this is what today is about, is the military justice review that Justice Fish has done, has provided us with concrete recommendations, and more importantly, to evolve our military justice system to support our Canadian Armed Forces members and put confidence towards it. Sometimes we have to be able to look at the various things that we are going through to look at what changes are needed to be made. And I'm very happy to see, and I was very happy to read the report myself a number of times, where Justice Fish went to some very concrete, thoughtful process to come to those recommendations. And so I'm committed to this. More importantly, we're going to be creating an implementation plan and make it transparent that we will report to NDDN or the committee so that they can see the progress. But most importantly, this is about making sure that we create an inclusive environment in the Canadian Armed Forces, and the implementation plan that we'll create is very similar to what we did in implementing the defense policy, a concrete plan with progress reports that'll be very transparent.
And as a follow-up, I'd like to know just kind of what role you and the government, the political side, will play in making sure that these recommendations are implemented. I'm basically just trying to get a sense of where does the buck stop here? Is it with the military and the responsibility will be on them to implement, or are you going to be taking an active role and the government taking an active role in making sure that these recommendations are implemented?
This is something, Lee, our government has been committed to making sure that we have tackled these type of systemic issues, whether systemic racism, sexual misconduct, not just in the military, but wider government in our institutions as well. So yes, not only from a government perspective, we'll be taking an active role, but inside the Canadian Armed Forces, I'll be taking an active role to making sure the implementation is going to be done. And so what we're looking at, not just the Canadian Armed Forces, as a deputy minister who stands beside me, is absolutely committed to making sure that we have an inclusive environment for the civilian employees in the Department of National Defense. So we will create an implementation plan that will be designed very similar to how we the implementation of the defense policy, with a governance process that works its way up to me, and more importantly, where I, as a minister, will report to our defense committee and to parliamentarians and all Canadians through them.
Next question, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question is from Kevin Gallagher with CTV National News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good afternoon. My question is for Minister Sajjan. Minister, a big chunk of this report does focus on victims, and certainly for survivors of sexual assault and sexual misconduct in the military, there's a real hesitance to come forward. There's fear of reprisals, and this lays out some recommendations to do that. So what's the timeline for implementing some of these changes, whether it be having military police handle the investigations or other aspects of involving the SMRC? What's the timeline to implement some of these, or specifically the victims' rights stuff that's in here? What's the timeline for implementing these measures that will allow the survivors of sexual misconduct and sexual assault to feel more empowered and safer when they come forward with complaints?
Well, thank you very much for the question. It's absolutely crucial that we move as quickly as possible, but we want to make sure that we get this right. The recommendations that Justice Fish has put forward, you can tangibly see the confidence that it can build, but it will require a significant amount of work. We're moving immediately on the recommendations that don't require legislative or regulatory changes. But we will be putting a plan together that we will present to our National Defense Committee, where we will then update on a regular basis. So I'll leave it if our Judge Advocate General or Minister Lametti would want to provide any comments too in terms of the timeline it takes when it comes to some of the legislative changes that might need to take place.
So specifically the recommendations about sexual misconduct, unless someone was going to follow up there, I can allow them to, 65 and 66, they're not on the list of recommendations that are going to be implemented or that are being committed to start the implementation right now. Is that, you're saying that those ones for sexual misconduct need some type of legislative action?
So we are going to be moving we'll be working not only within the department, but we'll be working with Justice Fish and working, putting together whatever structures are going to be needed. There are some areas where even Justice Fish is, we have to put working groups together. However, there are certain aspects that we will move as quickly as possible. We are committed to implementing the recommendations, but there are a lot of work behind that needs to be done. The timeline itself for the legislative change does take time, but we do need to get this right. And I've asked Justice Fish to work with us as we look at working towards the implementations. I wanted to make sure that we are actually meeting Justice Fish's intent on the recommendations, and he has offered up his support in this regard.
Thank you. If I could just add to that question, there are a number of complexities. We've done a great deal on the civilian side with respect to the victims of sexual violence, intimate partner violence, and such, sexual assault, and we are continuing to invest in that. The transition to better protection within the military system, or the transfer out of the military system of some victims is complex, because there are investigative questions, there are prosecutorial questions, and then there are questions of hearing. So we're committed to working with Minister Sajjan and the Department of National Defense to make that work, and we're committed to doing so diligently.
Next question, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, is from Jacques Galland with the Toronto Star. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Yes, hi. My question is for Minister Sajjan, and it's relating to recommendation 68 that I noticed was not identified as one of the recommendations to be implemented in the short term, that until the Declaration of Victims' Rights is brought into force, that sexual assault should be referred to civilian authorities. Why isn't that being implemented in the short term? Is there a specific reason? Does that require legislative changes?
Well, first, we have to be mindful of the independence of the investigative process in its current form that it's at. As a political figure, we can't interfere with the current process that we have right now. So the independence of the investigative process by the military police, and also independence of the prosecutor in terms of how they look at trying things. But this is where things can only change if the discretion is taken away. If we go down the legislative process. That's why we have to be able to do that work to make those changes. And I believe that the Provost Marshal will have more to say on this, but we're absolutely committed to Justice Fish's recommendations in this regard, to making sure that there is an efficiency for justice for the survivors that come forward.
Thanks. And my follow-up is also for the Minister. We've heard from the current Ombudsman, Mr. Lick, that his office already has the mandate to be an independent oversight body of the military, that all his office needs really is to be able to report directly to Parliament. He's described this as a relatively simple thing to do, and that it does not require another independent review. So I'm wondering why not make that change? Why not allow the Ombudsman to report directly to Parliament?
Like I said, everything is currently on the table, but we want to make sure that we get this right. We want to make sure that just because we can have a external body report to Parliament doesn't possibly can fix things. I want to make sure that we go through a proper analysis. This is why I've asked Justice of the Board to take a look at what an external system will be needed. Once she conducts her work, we'll have a much better idea that will have a proper independence when it comes to people coming forward with any type of complaints of misconduct. But more importantly, it will be completely outside of the chain of command. We need to make also possibly organizational and regulatory changes to give certain powers as well. But this is the work that Madame Arbour will be doing, and so. What I want to do is not trying to point in any direction of which we were going to go. I want to allow Madame Arbour to be able to do that work so that we get this right.
Next question, prochaine question.
Thank you, merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, is from Mercedes Stevenson with Global News. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Hi, thank you so much for taking our questions. My question is for you, Minister Sajjan. In the report, Justice Fish talks about how the military justice system has been notoriously resistant to criticism or change from the outside. Are you willing, as the Defense Minister, to push these changes through, in particular where it comes to sexual misconduct? Because over and over, we've heard the system is going to change, and yet we see right in this report that 6 years after your government has come in, really nothing has changed for victims of sexual misconduct.
To answer your question very simply, Mercedes, absolutely, yes. We're absolutely committed to this. This is why when Justice Fish launched his review, we wanted to take a look at the changes that were needed. Over the years, as we looked at some of the complexities that we were also dealing with, we knew that we have to conduct a National Defense Act review. And Justice Fish's work has really done, and his team have done a phenomenal job of looking at these things. So we're absolutely committed to this. We need to reform the military justice system so that it builds confidence for our Canadian Armed Forces members.
And just as a follow-up, why have you made the decision, at least it appears you've made the decision, to keep sexual misconduct within the military justice system instead of removing it and placing it with civilian investigators and prosecutors, as a number of allied countries have decided to do after facing similar problems inside their forces?
I would say that this is something that we'll be actually examining closely. Absolutely, the recommendations that Justice Fish has brought forward will be given the current system that we have now, it's the independence of the investigative body, the military police, to make that decision. But we will be doing the necessary work to see what direction we needed to take it to. For example, the legislative changes. If there is legislative change for this, as we work with Justice Fish and his team, this is the direction that will go. The goal for this is to making sure that we give confidence not only to our members, but we want to make sure that we have efficiency in the system as well. As you know, that the Canadian Armed Forces is spread across the country. So we want to make sure we look at all the complexities so that we can get this right. And I just want to pass it on to if Minister Lametti or the JAG have any further comments to this.
Thank you, Minister. I just want to echo again, Mercedes, what the Minister had said and what I'd said in the answer to the previous question, which is this is a course of action that has a great deal of merit, but it is complex, and so we need to do it right. Not only we obviously have to protect the victim, and make sure the victims' rights are protected and vindicated. But we also need to create an environment where victims are comfortable coming forward and a set of procedures where they're comfortable moving forward. And also preventing against unnecessary delays in the transition. Again, there are policing decisions, investigative decisions, prosecutorial decisions, and then the court decisions themselves, the procedure provisions. So there is complexity here. We're not afraid of that, but it is something we are committed to, but it will take time.
And on my part, if I may, what I want to indicate is that, Ms. Stevenson, I fully acknowledge your comment that in the past, military justice actors have been very reluctant to change. This is true. This is something that has been observed. However, I would like to put on the record that as the current Judge Advocate General, I fully embrace the recommendations made by Justice Fish. They are incredibly important. They must be looked at. They must be implemented to their fullest extent as much as possible. This goes to the very heart of the ongoing credibility and legitimacy of the military justice system and its ability to meet the needs of those who use it and those who are impacted by it.
Thank you. Merci. This concludes today's press conference. Merci tout le monde. Bon après-midi.